La Serenata dell'Eco by Ennio Bolognini. Listen, I'm only too pleased to be talking about the greatest cellist who ever lived, Ennio Bolognini, and whom, I had known since I was 8.5 years old.
Ennio Bolognini was born in Buenos Aires in 1893. The son of an amateur cellist, he studied first with his father and later with José García Jacot, who also taught Pau Casals. Bolognini was extremely gifted as a cellist and was praised by the leading cellists of his time as one of the greatest in the world. In addition to being a cellist, Bolognini was also a conductor, an aviator and flying instructor, a prominent boxer, and a composer. In this video, we shall learn about Bolognini from the words of his protege, the great American cellist Christine Walewska. Walewska studied with Maurice Maréchal, Gregor Piatigorksy, and Bolognini. Bolognini taught Walewska the techniques needed to perform his very difficult works for cello solo, and she became Bolognini's main advocate while touring the world for concerts. Bolognini died in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1979.
I remember the first time, when I mentioned to you that I had those 3 concerts in Buenos Aires in 1 week. I played with the symphony orchestra. It was the Philharmonic Orchestra, which José Bragato was the first cellist. So I did the Brahms double with Henrik Schering, and he was sitting there as first cellist, and the Dvorak concerto with Dean Dixon, with whom I'd already played in Germany. And so José Bragato came to me after the last concert and he said, "Me gustaría ser su amigo durante el resto de mi vida. And I want to do as much as possible for you," which he did do his whole life. And he wrote compositions for me, the Milanton, which is famous now, that's played with orchestras, quartets, everything. He wrote it in 1 night for me. And I spent many, many hours with him. And I have a video showing him at age 100 writing a piece of music for me. When I went to Japan for the first time in 1974, and it's really funny because as I have been going there the last several years, they point out I was so young when I went in 1974. So they said when she came the first time, she was a princess. Now she's a queen. Of course, the passage of all these decades. But anyway, it turns out that, of course, nobody had ever heard of Bolognini. I brought all of these pieces to Japan. He has such a following in Japan like you cannot believe. I mean, just phenomenal. And like 3 amateur cellists, all 3 medical doctors, came to my concert when I played in the Santa Barbara Beethoven Festival. And of course, I didn't know that the Beethoven Festival had a website that they could see in Japan. And so these three doctors came to Santa Barbara just especially to hear me play live. And they brought a pristine recording of that 1957 recording of Bolognini, perfect condition. And I said, oh, Mrs. Bolognini was here for last night's Beethoven concert. She would be so touched to see that you have brought this all the way from Japan. And I said, since you came to hear Beethoven, to hear me play Beethoven, I will now play the other great B, Bolognini. So backstage, I played all those pieces for them as an encore for the fact that they made that trip all the way from Tokyo. But Bolognini was always in my life for as long as he lived. I always went to see him in, and it's interesting because I always know that nobody can compare with the way he plays his own pieces. But thankfully, he also liked the way I played them. And that's why the Cime Museum, the magnificent museum that now has the greatest collection of stringed instruments in the world, paid for that last CD of mine, and that's available, you know, and they did it because they wanted Bolognini's pieces to be put down on record for future generations to hear them. You know, so many, many millions of experiences with him and his wonderful wife, Dorothy Bolognini. She's now 96, and she's been my lifelong friend. When she was 90, she was given all kinds of wonderful awards by the governor of Nevada and other dignitaries. It was a whole room full of people. And then, as I had surprised her by coming to her 90th birthday, she announced to the audience, she said, I'm so happy that my lifelong friend, Christine Walewska, has flown in as a surprise to be here at my 90th birthday. Because she said, I'll never forget, I met her for the first time when she was 10 years old, playing her beautiful little 8-size Bernadelle cello. My husband had taken me over to her house. He wanted me to hear her play. And so she said, I listened to this little girl on this 8-size Bernadelle, and I whispered to my husband, Ennio, this little girl is going to be a great cellist. And she said at this big event of her birthday, she said, my husband whispered back to me, she already is. Also, when I was out there for Mrs. Bolognini's 90th birthday, I recorded the scrapbook that she kept of her husband. She was looking at him with her opera glasses, handsome man, you can imagine. And we probably all have experienced a great love at those ages. And she just, you know, was in love with this handsome cellist. And she collected all of his musical reviews in her scrapbook. And she collected all of his accomplishments on the sports pages. And as you know, he raced cars, he flew airplanes, he was a great boxer, he was the welterweight champion of South America at one time. And as a matter of fact, the first time that he left Argentina was not for a tour of concerts of the cello, but rather as the sparring partner for Firpo, the famous Argentine boxer. He was also a stunt flyer, and that he taught the boys when he was almost 50, B-29s, you know, for the, you know, he was just phenomenal. And of course, as you know, he was the founder of the Las Vegas Symphony Orchestra and wonderful conductor. And he learned conducting from none other than Arturo Toscanini, who was his godfather, as you know. Yes, I mean, look, there's definitely, I mean, it's not only my opinion, but all of the famous cellists who knew him recognized him as being the greatest cellist. And like Pablo Casals had said, he's the greatest cello talent I ever heard in my life, and that's for sure. But interestingly enough, there's Feuermann, who was a tremendous admirer of Bolognini. And there was an incident when Pablo Casals and Piatigorksy were together, the three of these famous cellists together at one time. And Feuermann said to Pablo Casals, Pablo, it is not you, nor you, Grisha, nor myself, who is the greatest cellist in the world today. It is Ennio Bolognini. And I must tell you that my father first heard his name from the lips of Piatigorksy. So at any rate, when Piatigorksy came for his first tour to the United States, he came into Leinenhealy, where my father and he were actually the same age. And my father immediately spoke to Piatigorksy, and he befriended him, and he said, I would very much like to come and help you with the cello and pick you up at your hotel and take you to the concert hall. And as a matter of fact, my father told me that when he knocked on Piatigorksky's door, Piatigorksy came to the door in his pajamas, and he said to him, Gott sei Dank, dass Sie gekommen sind. I overslept my nap. And so he quickly got dressed, and my father took him in a taxi to his concert. And the next day, my father read the reviews to him. And the title of the review was, Piatigorksy is the John Barrymore of the cello. Well, Piatigorksy misunderstood that, because as we all know, Piatigorksy had a very dramatic way of coming out on the stage. He looked like a gladiator, and marvelous presence. So he thought that they were thinking that, he was like an actor. And my father said, no, you misunderstand it. What they mean is that just as John Barrymore is the most famous actor in the world, you are the greatest cellist in the world. And he said, no, there is one greater, Ennio Bolognini. And that was the first time that my father heard his name spoken. My father had arranged for Bolognini to record for Capitol Records all of his pieces. But Bolognini, who never put anything on a back burner, he was always for doing everything now. I want to do it now. But we know with recordings, it's always 1 year in advance, you see. So what did Bolognini decide to do? He borrowed the Mendelssohn Stradivarius from my father, and he took a reel-to-reel tape recorder into his bathroom to record the pieces that are for cello alone on that recording, because that gives the sound like you would have in a recording studio, or like in my case, Philips always chose very beautiful resonating halls to record. So when he was teaching me these pieces, my father was there and, taking in everything, because these pieces are all quite difficult. And, it's got to sound like the lightness of the guitar. And you, both of you being cellists, that the guitar with its frets and its tiny space between the strings and the fingerboard is very little. So this flamenco technique on the guitar is very simple, but now you take our strings, which, as my mother used to say, the cello strings are like ropes, metal ropes, and you must have a light feel to it, and yet it takes a great deal of strength to do this. So when he would be teaching me this, it's very difficult technique. He would pause and he'd say, "Oh, you're such a beautiful señorita," and oh, you're so this and you're so that. And so then my father would say, "Well, come on, Ennio, get back to business with the pieces." I've seen your wonderful catalog, and for instance, the different Argentine composers like Aguirre and Washington Castro. I knew the daughter of Aguirre who married Washington Castro. And by the way, when I was 18 years old, on my first trip to Buenos Aires, playing those 3 concerts in the Teatro Colón, I also played in different cities. And one of them was with the orchestra in Mar del Plata, where Washington Castro was the conductor. And what was so interesting was that on his biography, it mentions that he had studied with the great Maurice Maréchal. And although he was a white-haired gentleman and I was an 18-year-old, in my biography, it also said that Christine studied with the great Maurice Maréchal. I think it's marvelous that cellists have your catalog as a source to be finding these things. And I know that you are also in contact with Argentina, Sadaic, which was created. You see, you have created this catalog. And the person that created the catalog of Sadaic was my lifelong friend, José Bragato, who, as you know, was responsible for making Piazzolla famous.
Wonderful. I feel so grateful to hear all these stories, because it's a cellist that probably young generations don't know much about, and I hope this interview helps for everybody to get to know what a wonderful cellist and musician and man Bolognini was.
He was a fantastic man, such a warm, wonderful person. And that's another reason why, when he was studying medicine, the chief doctor said to him, "Look, you are too sensitive a person to be a doctor," because he would take everything to heart, and he did this with all people. Like when you were in his presence, or what, everybody felt this. He was completely, devoted to listening to that person, just extraordinary. So there are millions more stories, but there's not time enough.
Incredible. Thank you so much.